find a long-term rental in France while looking for a property to buy?
No. It can be really tricky finding a long-term rental in France. Even as a French person, you've got two types of rentals in France. You've got the main one, which is usually on a 3-year lease for unfurnished properties. And then you've got a furnished lease, which is usually over 12 months and then can be renewed on a 12-month basis. But the law in France is very heavily leaning towards tenants. So for example, from October to March, a landlord can't kick out a tenant. And it's really, really hard to kick out tenants for any reason, even if they don't pay the rent. So because of that, unfortunately, landlords are very wary of renting out their properties. And if they go through an agency especially, there are quite strict criteria to be able to rent a property, and it's incredibly difficult. So if you are going to look for a long-term rental in France, it's not to say it's impossible, but it's probably better to try and find a private landlord or through connections, or try and definitely get it arranged before coming over, because we've got that case as well. We've had that with tenants and with ourselves, of people just coming over and thinking they'll find somewhere once in France quite easily, and it's not the case. Even though you may have all the funds in your account, you may be able to pay, but if you don't have all the paperwork, and this is France, so they want all the paperwork, birth certificates, employment, proof of address, all these things in French, it can be very, very tricky to find. So options, depending if you're looking to rent until you can buy somewhere and move in, you might want something a little bit more intermediate. That's what we did with my family. We stayed in a number of gîtes before we actually were able to move into our property. So for about 6 months, we were in quite a few gîtes. We stayed at my parents' for a bit. We did what we could. It helps sometimes, if it's not the high season, to negotiate directly with gîte owners. You can say, I found you on Airbnb or Booking.com or other websites. Would you be interested in a long-term rental? So that's an option. And then that's what I do with my gîtes, and we do special short-term leases. The bills in their names as well, so they get proof of address, they get the bills, they start getting a little bit into the system. It can still be a bit tricky to find, and especially once you get from Easter onwards, it's become more like the holiday season. So obviously, when people rent out a gîte, they make a lot more money of it as a gîte than they do long-term rentals. So not everybody's going to want to do that. So it can be a little bit tricky. Definitely research it before coming into France, make contacts. You can suggest maybe something on a rolling month-to-month basis, get all the terms agreed in writing as you would with any other lease. But it's not impossible, but from one area to the other, it might be quite tricky. So it helps, again, just get talking to people, ask the mairie, ask local estate agents, any connections you've got that are already in France. It can be tricky, but it can be done. But you just have to persevere and get talking to everyone until somebody says yes.